Look, I want to jump into all the questions around hunting, ethical things, what we wouldn't know about you as a hunter. But like, let me just talk about my history. So I grew up in San Diego, but my grandpa had a ranch in Arizona. And so we used to go out there, and my cousins all had 22s. And my uncle was a big gun guy. He was like ex-Vietnam, and he used to walk around with like 44s on his hip, and he used to carry like a mini 14, and like he was into it, right?
Yeah.
And I remember my cousins used to, I remember one time they shot squirrels, and I actually didn't shoot one. My brother and my cousin shot a squirrel, and they cooked them up, and I remember eating squirrel, and that was like a weird thing.
Yeah.
You know? Also, my grandpa was a cattle rancher, and I remember him giving us a half a cow once a year, and we'd literally drive it home to San Diego and stick it in our freezer, and that was like our sustenance. But I was still a city boy, so I never really got the connection. Blood still made me squirrely. My grandpa used to take me fishing, and I couldn't gut the fish, typical like, city boy stuff. And so that was like me. And then I lived in cities, New York City and LA, and I was totally separated from meat, wildlife, anything. And I just bought meat in a store. And in America, it comes really beautifully packaged, and it looks like it's manufactured that way, right?
does, yeah.
It comes in the clean film and USDA approved, and it's gorgeous. And then last year, I went 100% plant-based on a challenge to do an Ironman race on a plant-based diet. So I started eating only plants. I'd never done that in my life. I thought I might fail. I ended up figuring it out. My wife was cooking for me. But then when you start eating plants, you start also kind of judging people about, it's true. If you just eat plants, after about 3 or 4 months, you're like, why are you eating that? Why does the animal have to die? Why? Then you look at factory farm stuff and sausages, and you're like, what's going on here? And at the end of the year, I finally made a conscious decision to bring meat products back in my life, but also hopefully a little more consciously, maybe thinking about where they come from or why I'm eating it, as opposed to just shove it in my mouth. And so obviously leaving that kind of vegan community, they weren't too happy about it. And there's lots of questions. And so look, also part of me had heard about hunting, and I was kind of curious about it, because people say when you kill an animal, you have this kind of a spiritual relationship with it. You kind of connect with it. You kind of connect with nature, which seems completely opposite to most people. They're like, how can you love an animal and kill an animal at the same time? How can you care about an animal and then kill it? And so I thought I'd really want to talk to one of the top people, and that's why you're here. So I'd love it if you could just answer some of these questions for me. And I'm still curious about hunting, and it's not like I want to kill an animal, but I feel like it's an experience, and maybe it's something carnal. Maybe it's in my DNA, and I've heard people like Tim Ferriss of the 4-Hour Workweek, when he did the 4-Hour Chef movie, he said that when I think he went with Steve Rinella, who I know you know. And Tim said when he was cutting the animal open, he said something, it feels like deja vu. He felt like I've done this before, which is weird.
Yeah.
And that planted a seed in my head. And so, look, I don't have plans to hunt yet, but I think in the next year or two, I'd love to go out and do it, to experience it. But anyways, when I tell you all this stuff, what comes to your mind when you're hearing the story?
Yeah, it makes me think of, well, there's a lot of things that hunters go through that isn't easily explained. As like you're saying, when it feels, we have something in our DNA. We got to this point right now. It's only been a very small portion of human history that we didn't need to hunt to survive. And there still are many cultures that are a lot closer connected to that. But there's something that we have in order to survive that made us hunters. And when you go through the process of it, you tap into something very primal. And I think that, unfortunately, with the media that's out there, a lot of hunters actually get portrayed in a light that most hunters don't identify with. I truly believe that. Because the hunters that I know and the hunters that I talk to all have a shared experience of what it is, almost tapping into this primal nature of it's a very hard thing to describe, but I think I recently took my wife on her first hunt. It was about a year ago now, maybe a little longer. And watching her go through the experience reminded me of when I first started hunting. Now, I grew up hunting as a kid. My dad took me out. His dad hunted. But if you think about hunting is something that gets passed down. I one day was watching weasels in my backyard. The mom was taking the weasels into a rabbit hole and bringing with babies, and then bringing the weasels were bringing baby rabbits out. So the mother weasel was passing that down to her children, the hunting, because it's something that is taught, but it's also something that's instinctual. And the first time I took my wife out, she really wasn't sure. When we'd met, she said I could never kill an animal, and I 100% respect that opinion. You know, you talked about being a vegan and eating a plant-based diet, and to be honest, even though I'm a hunter, I can respect that a lot more than somebody that isn't a hunter, that is against hunting, yet eats meat. Because to me, that's like an extreme hypocrisy. And we can get into that later as far as like the ethics and the meat and the food value of it. But
Because someone else is doing the dirty
someone
work.
else is doing the dirty work.
Right.
And my wife loved to eat the game meat and would go out on trips, loves hiking and other things, but she just never thought I would ever hunt, or she would ever hunt. And then one day she just thought, you know, I'm eating these animals. I would like to know what it's like to be a part of the process, just once, just to see what it was like. And she just all of a sudden decided this is something that she would like to try. She just thought, yeah, it makes no sense that I eat meat, and in which it isn't for everyone, but she decided to give it a try. And we went out there. We were hunting deer, and when she got her first deer, it was that same almost rush of adrenaline, a shaking, a nervousness, and then after the kill, a sadness.
Okay.
But she described it in a way of like sad for the animal in one way, and then when we started cutting it into meat, she just felt a sense of relief. But she felt like the way she described it was one of the most vivid memories and experiences, like being so engulfed in that very second, that very moment. You get very few moments like that in life. A very intimate process. And I believe that that's what comes back to our DNA, that primalness of, it felt like Tim said, it felt like something she'd done before in a way, even though she'd never done anything like that, and remembered it in a way that had never had a memory like that. And because of that, you know, that meat now is something that she valued even more than any meat she'd ever had. Right. Because you're a part of the process now. You took that life, you're responsible for it. And so to go through the struggle of the challenge of actually getting it, and then the decision that, okay, I'm going to take that life.
Right.
And then to turn that into food, that food has so much value at that point that it's unlike anything else you can eat, because you feel responsible for it. And it is in some ways a weird feeling, but because you feel responsible for it, it then lends value to the life of that animal. You know, I think a lot of people mischaracterize hunters as people that are just out to kill.
Right.
That's one of the smallest portions of hunting in the entire process of it. If you understand, well, especially where I hunt out west, it's mountain hunting. There's a lot of physical exertion. When you get the animal, you have to carry a lot of weight and everything back. It's a process. And then once you get the meat home, to go through that, and then it's on your plate. It's not like something you just bought in the store. Something you bought in the store is just, it almost feels like a product. Where, I mean, could you imagine if every steak you ate in your life, like you go to a restaurant, you buy a steak, and you now have a photo of that steak and a memory of that animal? Wouldn't you value that animal a little bit more if somebody left a scrap on the plate, and you'd be like, well, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But an animal died for that. So you become very connected with your food in that way. It really is unlike any other experience with, I definitely believe, with food as well. There's a primal feeling, but there's also a sense of responsibility and a sense of remembrance, and you immediately respect those animals in a way that you didn't before.
And you have to eat them really to do that.
Correct, yeah.
Which is so kind of strange, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
if you told this story to a 4-year-old, they'd be like, what? Like, but it doesn't make logical sense.
Yeah.
But when you explain it like that, it doesn't. And for you, it's that whole process could take like a year, right? Because
Yeah.
you're when maybe you're learning how to shoot a gun or a bow and arrow. I guess your wife had to learn how to shoot, maybe.
Yep.
And then you got to plan the trip, and then you got to go out there and hunt, which can take, I guess, days.
Yeah.
And then once you do it, you have to make the decision to kill, and then you have to cut it up and then haul it out, and then you freeze it, and then you cook it up and you serve it to your family and you consume it. I mean, that's
Yeah. It's a long process.
It's kind of the gift that keeps on giving.
It is, yeah.
And it makes you kind of evolve and become connected and become more human.
Yeah.
Is the idea.
I think so.
Wow.
I think, yeah, we've evolved ourselves to a place where we've made animals products in a way. And I think that hunting reminds you the opposite of that. Now, it sounds strange because you go, well, you're killing an animal. But if I identify as a hunter and there were no animals, I feel like I would cease to exist in some ways. A part of me would die. So it's in my best interest that I want to see the animals that I pursue flourish. I don't want to see low populations of them. You know, I want to hunt an animal that is in excess, not that it's in decline. And because of that, I'm highly invested in their habitats, protecting their habitats, in the animals and the species themselves. You know, in order to successfully harvest an elk, say, in the mountains of Montana, you need to know everything there is to elk. You need to physically prepare for shooting as well as physical exertion to get to where they live. You need to understand their habits, their habitat. You have to really think about elk 365 days a year in the hopes that you might get one. And you know that the odds are probably against you. For the normal person going out, it's 10%.
10% get a
10%,
kill.
yeah.
And the rest just get
The rest
an
don't.
exerted trip out into the wild.
And the people that really put the time in and understand the animals, they might get an elk nearly yearly, whereas the other people that don't think about it, don't put the time and effort in, it's a very hard task to accomplish.
Okay. You know, I just had an experience. There's a guy named Terrence McKenna who's now gone, and he talks about psychedelics, and one of the things he talks about is mushrooms, and you know, kind of psychedelic mushrooms. And he says you should grow your own, because he says when you grow it, it takes you maybe 8 or 10 weeks, and you learn about what it's about, and you cultivate it, and some die and some don't. And he said only then are you ready to actually consume it. And it's just, I don't know, it kind of seems like a similar thing. Like there's a lot more going on here than just a bite.
Yeah. Well, and the same with growing your own food or anything that takes time and labor. You know, you have to, you do value it in a different way than you value things that are almost not necessarily given to you, but easy to obtain.